What drives a powerful emperor to give up everything and disappear into anonymity? This is the intriguing story of Alejandro I and the enigmatic figure of Fyodor Kuzmich, a narrative that challenges official history and delves into universal questions about guilt, redemption, and spirituality. Did Alejandro fake his death to seek inner peace away from palaces and politics? Or is Fyodor Kuzmich, the hermit who lived in Tomsk, just a piece of a collective myth? In this video, we'll explore the relationship between these two mysterious names. We'll talk about the rumors of Alejandro I's death, his possible link to the strict monastic grand scheme of Russian Orthodoxy, and the psychological weight of carrying an empire on your shoulders. We will also delve into the figure of Fyodor Kuzmich, his connection to the Tsar, and what his journey teaches us about renunciation and personal transformation. This story, which mixes fact and speculation, offers a unique look at the human search for purpose and redemption. Without further ado, let's get started. The influence of Orthodox spirituality on the imperial court. From birth, the Russian Tsars were profoundly shaped by Orthodox spirituality, which permeated not only religious life, but also the cultural and political aspects of the Russian Empire. In the Orthodox view, the Tsar was considered God's anointed, a mediator between heaven and earth, responsible for both earthly leadership and the spiritual protection of his people. For Alejandro I, this spirituality was not a superficial obligation, but an intrinsic component of his identity. From childhood, he was brought up in an environment of religious rigor, where the Orthodox faith not only offered consolation, but also guided decisions of great impact. The Orthodox Church, with its rich liturgy, solemn rituals, and emphasis on repentance and redemption, had a lasting influence on Alejandro, shaping his worldview and his actions as a leader. During his reign, he sought to reform aspects of Russian society based on Christian values, promoting charity and morality. However, the traumatic events of his life, such as the death of his father, Tsar Paul I, and the horrors of the Napoleonic Wars, left deep scars on his psyche. Religion, which had previously been a source of inspiration, also became a space for questioning and searching for spiritual relief. Alejandro's spiritual connection can be seen in his closeness to religious leaders and his interest in mystical ideas that went beyond conventional Orthodox doctrine. These elements help contextualize his supposed transformation into Fyodor Kuzmich, a figure who exemplified humility, asceticism, and devotion, ideal characteristics within the Orthodox spiritual vision. Alejandro's renunciation of power, if true, was not just an escape from political responsibilities, but a deliberate search for a spiritual path that reflected the teachings of his religious upbringing. Thus, his story transcends the political sphere, touching on fundamental questions about faith, repentance, and the search for inner peace. Psychology of power and the quest for redemption. The weight of being an emperor is a burden that transcends political and administrative obligations. It deeply invades the psyche and the soul. Alejandro I, as Tsar of Russia, carried not only the responsibility of ruling one of the world's greatest powers, but also the weight of the almost divine expectations imposed by the Russian society of his time. In the Orthodox tradition, the emperor was seen as a representative of God on earth, a mediator between the heavenly and the earthly. This view added a spiritual layer to his role, turning every political decision into a test of faith and morality. For Alejandro, however, the throne was not just a stage of glory, but a prison of regrets. His initial reluctance to accept the role of Tsar and the tragedies that marked his reign, including the assassination of his father, Tsar Paul I, and the countless lives lost in the Napoleonic Wars, contributed to the formation of a man torn between duty and the search for meaning. Contemporary psychologists suggest that leaders subjected to extreme levels of pressure and isolation often face existential crises. Power, rather than satisfying, can alienate, creating a chasm between who a person is and who they need to appear to be. In Alejandro's case, this tension seems to have been exacerbated by a deep sense of guilt and inadequacy. Although historically there is no definitive proof of his participation in the plot that led to his father's death, the mere suspicion would have tormented him. The weight of responsibility combined with grief and remorse could have triggered a growing desire for renunciation, to free himself from the chains of power and seek spiritual redemption. Alejandro's supposed transformation into Fyodor Kuzmich illustrates an extreme attempt to resolve this dilemma. Abandoning power, a life of privilege and honor, can be seen as an act of courage, but also as a silent cry for inner peace. The psychology of power teaches us that those who hold it often face a cruel paradox. Power offers control over the outside world, but often leaves the person feeling helpless in relation to their own inner world. This disconnection can lead to radical gestures, such as abdication or isolation, in the search for deeper meaning. Alejandro can be interpreted as an archetype of the tormented leader, a man who has faced the consequences of overwhelming decisions and sought to flee the stage to heal his invisible wounds. His journey, whether real or symbolic, invites us to reflect on the complexities of leadership and the choices we make when confronted with our failures. Is power a divine gift or a curse in disguise? To what extent are we willing to sacrifice everything, our identity, our achievements, and even our history, to find a glimpse of peace? Alejandro's story challenges the idea that power brings happiness, suggesting that for some, the true meaning of life can only be found by renouncing the world they once controlled. The role of personal relationships in Alejandro's decision. Little is discussed about Alejandro the Fern's close relationships and how they may have shaped his decision to renounce the throne and seek a life of anonymity. However, the personal connections he maintained throughout his life, especially with his wife Isabel Alexeyevna and other members of the imperial family, were crucial to his emotional and spiritual development. Isabel, a woman known for her grace and intelligence, played a significant role in Alejandro's life. Married from a very young age, they faced profound challenges together, including personal tragedies such as the loss of their children, which left indelible marks on both of them. Despite the difficulties, there is evidence that Isabel maintained a stabilizing influence on Alejandro, encouraging him to seek meaning beyond the pressures of power and the responsibilities of state. The loss of their children was not only a devastating event, but also a catalyst for deeper reflections on the fragility of life and the transience of earthly power. Isabel, being a woman of strong spiritual inclination, may have shared with Alejandro her own perspective of acceptance and resignation in the face of adversity, planting in him the seeds for a journey of inner transformation. The exchange of letters between the couple, marked by tones of introspection and mutual support, reveals the emotional impact that these tragedies had on them, while reinforcing the idea that Isabel was not only a consort, but also a spiritual partner who understood Alejandro's inner struggles. In addition to Isabel, other family figures also shaped Alejandro's psyche. His grandmother, Catherine the Great, left a legacy of extraordinary expectations that hung over him throughout his life. Although he didn't live with her directly for long, the shadow of Catherine and her reign influenced Alejandro's view of leadership, morality, and the responsibility of a sovereign. On the other hand, the troubled relationship with his father, Tsar Paul I, contributed significantly to the emotional burden Alejandro carried. Paul was assassinated in 1801 in a plot that, according to speculation, Alejandro knew would take place, but chose not to prevent. This traumatic event not only marked the beginning of his reign, but also cast a shadow of guilt that followed him for the rest of his life. close friends and advisors also played ambiguous roles in his journey. While some sought to reinforce his sense of duty as Tsar, others, possibly religious leaders or philosophers, may have encouraged Alejandro to explore spiritual paths as a way of dealing with his regrets and unfulfilled aspirations. Although the official history doesn't offer many details about these relationships, they make up an emotional and social backdrop that inevitably influenced Alejandro's choices, including his possible decision to renounce the throne. These human connections help to illuminate an often overlooked dimension of the narrative. Behind the public figure of the Tsar was a deeply sensitive man, vulnerable to the same emotional pains and complexities as anyone else. The impact of these relationships highlights that his supposed transformation into Fyodor Kuzmich was not just a political or spiritual reaction, but also a deeply personal response to the influences of those around him. If Alejandro sought redemption or peace in his later life, it is likely that he found inspiration and strength in those closest to him, whose presence helped him to question the true nature of power, responsibility, and above all, the meaning of life. The death of Alejandro I. Myth or reality? Alejandro I, a Tsar who led Russia during one of the most complex and challenging periods in its history, officially died in 1825 in Taganrog from typhoid fever. However, since the announcement of his death, rumors began to spread, fueling theories that the Tsar had not actually died, but had faked his death in order to escape the responsibilities and guilt he carried. Alejandro was a ruler marked by decisions that shaped Russia, but also by a personal shadow that is hard to ignore: the murder of his father, Tsar Paul I. Historians point out that, although he did not participate directly in the plot, Alejandro knew of the plans against his father and chose not to intervene. This fact, over the years, would have become an unbearable burden for him, leading him to seek redemption in an extreme act of total renunciation. According to the most widespread theory, Alejandro exchanged palace intrigues for the humble life of an ascetic. Around 1837, a decade after his supposed death, the figure of Fyodor Kuzmich appeared in Tomsk, a man of refined manners, remarkable serenity, and who seemed to carry a mysterious past. This unexpected presence attracted attention, mainly because Fyodor displayed a dignified demeanor, befitting someone accustomed to nobility. The fascination surrounding his figure increased when cipher notes were found in his belongings, signed with the initials AP, possibly for Alejandro Pavlovich, the Tsar's full name. In addition, handwriting analyses between Fyodor's writings and documents signed by Alejandro revealed intriguing similarities, reinforcing speculation that the two could be the same person. Alejandro and Fyodor's narrative transcends a simple search for answers about identity. It raises universal questions. To what extent can someone really leave behind their previous life and embrace a new existence? Or is it that, no matter how hard we try, we are always stuck with the ghosts of the past? The story of these two men, intertwined in such a peculiar way, continues to intrigue scholars and the curious, because it's not just a question of history, but a profound mystery about the essence of human transformation. Fyodor Kuzmich. Man and myth. Fyodor Kuzmich is one of the most enigmatic figures in Russian history, not only because of his life of solitude and wisdom, but also because of his striking similarities to Tsar Alejandro I. When Fyodor appeared in Tomsk in 1837, he already displayed a profound serenity, combined with an aura of mystery that attracted the attention of everyone around him. His polite manners, combined with unusual knowledge for someone from a humble background, quickly raised suspicions that he was not who he claimed to be. Among Fyodor's belongings, a ciphered note caught the eye. Signed with the initials AP, it seemed to contain references that could be interpreted as Alejandro Pavlovich. Furthermore, an analysis of his handwriting revealed an almost irrefutable resemblance to that of the Tsar. Testimonies from those who knew Fyodor describe him as a man who spoke with authority, but with humility, who behaved like a leader, but lived like a hermit. This intriguing duality made it impossible to ignore the possible connections between him and Alejandro's mysterious disappearance. But Fyodor is not just a historical figure surrounded by theories. He has become a symbol of transformation and redemption, a living example of how someone can seek inner peace in the midst of anonymity. For some, he is proof that it is possible to abandon the weight of the past. For others, he represents the paradox of identity. Even as we flee from who we are, we carry with us the traces of what we were. Fyodor Kuzmich not only challenged the norms of his time, but also left a legacy that continues to inspire questions about what it really means to start over. His story, intertwined with Alejandro's, is a powerful reminder that the greatest mysteries often lie in human hearts. The grand scheme, monastic secrets of orthodoxy. In Russian spirituality, the great schema is seen as the highest form of commitment to God. This rigorous monastic rite is reserved for those who seek an existence completely detached from earthly pleasures, dedicated exclusively to prayer and spiritual asceticism. Monks who follow this path not only renounce material possessions, but also isolate themselves from the world, living in constant meditation, fasting, and reflection. For Russian society at the time, this choice represented an almost superhuman purity of intention. Alejandro, who spent much of his life surrounded by opulence and political intrigue, could have found in the grand scheme a way to purify his soul and atone for his guilt. Historically, it is known that Alejandro had a strong religious inclination. During his reign, he promoted reforms based on Christian values and often sought spiritual advice. It is possible that the weight of his decisions as Tsar, combined with the guilt over his father's death, awakened in him a desire to reconnect with something greater. The grand scheme could have offered him an opportunity to abandon the vices and corruptions of power, embracing a path of simplicity and redemption. However, the mystery remains. Did Alejandro actually join a monastery, or was his spiritual transformation lived in the shadows, like Fyodor Kuzmich? This enigma leads us to deep reflections on the role of faith in personal transformation. Alejandro's journey, real or imagined, echoes a common desire in humanity: to transcend the limitations of material life and find a greater purpose. For many, the grand scheme is a symbol of spiritual liberation, but also proof that the quest for redemption requires courage and sacrifice. Alejandro's narrative questions the boundaries between guilt and forgiveness, power and humility, and invites us to reconsider what it really means to find peace. The role of rituals in personal transformation. In the Orthodox tradition, rituals are much more than religious practices. They are moments of deep spiritual connection and transformation. From sacramental confession to the elaborate rites of monastic ordination, each act carries a symbolic meaning that reflects a transition of state. These rituals mark not only the passage of time, but also an inner transformation, offering practitioners an opportunity to reconnect with the divine and redefine their lives. For Alejandro, if he truly embraced the identity of Fyodor Kuzmich, it is plausible that he went through specific rites that symbolized his renunciation of his past as Tsar and his acceptance of a new life as a hermit. Entry into asceticism, for example, required vows of humility and obedience, symbolizing a definitive break with the luxuries and excesses of secular life. These rituals, far from being exclusive to orthodoxy, find parallels in various traditions around the world. In Buddhism, ordination ceremonies mark the beginning of a spiritual journey that prioritizes renunciation and meditation. In Hinduism, rites of passage, such as sannyasa, reflect the decision to abandon worldly duties in order to dedicate oneself to the search for truth. This universal character of rituals highlights how they serve as a powerful mechanism for personal transformation, allowing individuals to leave behind old patterns and take on new identities. For Alejandro, rituals could have been not only a breaking point with his previous life, but also a way to atone for his sins and find a new purpose. These moments of transformation are important for understanding the depth of Alejandro's journey. Rituals represent more than symbolic gestures. They offer a psychological framework that helps process regrets and reconstruct a new personal narrative. If Alejandro really did become Fyodor Kuzmich, then his story exemplifies how rituals can act as portals for emotional healing and spiritual reinvention, allowing someone to transcend the limitations of their personal history. Parallels with other historical figures. The trajectory of Alejandro I as Fyodor Kuzmich, if true, finds fascinating echoes in other historical figures who also abandoned positions of great power in search of a simpler, more spiritual existence. One of the most notable examples is Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, who abdicated the throne in 1556 to live out the last years of his life in a monastery in Spain. Like Alejandro, Charles V faced the weight of a vast empire and the incessant demands of his position. His decision to retreat into monastic seclusion was not only a search for peace, but also an act of spiritual surrender, reflecting a time when leaders often saw power as a divine test. Another parallel can be found in the figure of the Dalai Lama, who, although he didn't renounce, lives in exile as a symbol of peaceful resistance and spiritual wisdom. These stories highlight a common pattern among leaders, the moment when power becomes a burden, leading to the need for renunciation, introspection, and reconnection with higher values. Alejandro I, beset by political and personal crises, may have felt similar pressure, seeking in his transformation as Fyodor Kuzmich a means of resolving the dilemmas that plagued him. These parallels also underline the universality of the human desire for redemption and transcendence. Whether in the context of a European monarch, a Tibetan spiritual leader, or a Russian Tsar, the stories of relinquishing power show that, for many, true freedom is not found in the accumulation of authority, but in its abdication. For Alejandro, as for others, this choice may have been as much an act of courage as of necessity, symbolizing the search for a purpose that transcends the expectations of the outside world. These historical connections not only enrich Alejandro's narrative, but also offer a broader perspective on what it means to lead, to give up, and above all, to find peace in a world of constant demands. And so we conclude our journey through the mysteries surrounding Alejandro I and Fyodor Kuzmich. We have explored the theories surrounding the supposed death of the Tsar, the austere path of the monastic grand scheme, and the emotional complexities of a leader who may have chosen to give up power in order to find peace. More than a mystery story, this is a narrative that reflects the challenges of the human condition, the search for meaning, the struggle to reconcile guilt and purpose, and the courage to abandon the familiar, to embrace the unknown. The mystery of Alejandro remains unanswered, but it resonates as an invitation to reflect on our own choices. In our lives, are we capable of renouncing what imprisons us in order to seek what sets us free? May these reflections inspire you to look inside yourself and search for what really matters. If this video has brought you new perspectives, don't forget to like it, share it, and leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for following us, and we'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to uncover stories that connect us to what is essential in the human experience.